back to the Adriana Cohen Show. You're listening to Boston Herald Radio. I'm Adriana. With me is John Sapichetti, and we're going to be welcoming onto the program former Senator Mark Kirk from Illinois. He is an advisory board member for UANI, which stands for United Against Nuclear Iran. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that seeks to prevent Iran from fulfilling ambition to obtain nuclear weapons. And thank you so much for joining us again. Mark, how are you?
Adriana, thanks for having me on.
Oh, our pleasure. Well, we wanted to welcome you on the show because so much is happening with Iran, with President Benjamin Netanyahu's massive reveal of troves of intelligence that shows that Iran is not complying with the terms of the nuclear agreement. Tell us more about it.
It appears that Prime Minister Netanyahu's intelligence service caught the Iranians with their pajamas around their knees there, and caught them comprehensively cheating on the agreement that was signed with President Obama. Mm-hmm. And they've been trying to make a nuclear weapon all along, even after the Obama payment of $10 billion in cash to the Iranians.
It's incredible. And Mark, where has that $10 billion of cash gone? Has it gone to fund terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, who hate the U.S.?
It went straight to Hezbollah and to Hamas and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps.
And, you know, many people warned President Obama about this, and former Secretary of State John Kerry say, hey, how could you give this cash, especially unmarked euros and Swiss francs in these pallets in the middle of the night? How can you do that? What guarantee do you have that this is not going to end into danger, that you're not funding terrorism and could kill Americans or our allies?
I will tell you, there was one thing that Wendy Sherman, who was the woman who was responsible for both the Iranian agreement and North Korean agreements. She is really outdone Neville Chamberlain and making mistakes of appeasing dictators like Hitler.
Wow!
And in her case, I informed her a majority of the payment that was made in cash was made in 500 euro notes. Mm-hmm. And I said, Wendy, hey, did you realize? The EU has already canceled the 500 euro note because they said, quote, it was too involved in drug dealing and terrorism. And that was exactly the kind of currency that she shipped by air direct to Iran.
That's right. And then also President Obama released these Iranian spies, these bad guys, which, you know, puts more dangerous people back into, you know, giving them freedom. What do you think President Trump and Secretary Mike Pompeo should do next? Should they fix the deal or should they fully withdraw?
No, they should pull out of the deal. Okay. They should end this record of appeasement, which has led to nothing but strengthening Iran. And in their case, they do need to talk around and make sure that other countries don't undercut us at all. And of course, we've got the big behemoth of China to deal with, which is critical to winning on North Korea that's coming up, which could be the biggest victory for President Trump. I've been calling on us to the Nobel Committee to issue what I call the double-double.
Wow!
To give a Nobel Peace Prize both to Xi Jinping and to our president. I think that would go a long way to improving the ego assuasion and cooperation between the United States and China on North Korea, isolating them.
If the president is able to negotiate all of this peace, absolutely deserves consideration, if not winning the Nobel Peace Prize. What do you think the chances are that they would give it to him, knowing how that they think?
I've always said, ever since they gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Rigoberta Menchú, just to underscore their point that they didn't like the fact that Europeans came to the New World. Mm-hmm. Thought that they might be too left-wing for the real world. So my hopes for the Nobel Committee to do the right thing.
In terms of the
anybody can propose anyone for a Nobel Prize, and I would encourage anyone listening to go ahead and and put in the president for a Nobel Prize on this North Korea success that he's got coming.
In terms of the Iran nukes deal, what other countries, obviously would be France, England, and a few other countries, but France and England primarily as allies of ours that we'd have to talk to be on our side on maybe reneging on the deal?
Probably the key player that still has dual-use usable nuclear technology would be Germany, because you want Angela Merkel to. That's why that meeting with the president had with Angela Merkel is so important. You want the Germans not to offer their super high tech to the Iranians that would accelerate their program.
Now, how do you think President Trump can negotiate with the foreign, the European allies who are, signatories on this Iran deal? Because they have financial interest, economic interest with Iran, and I'm sure they're going to be fearful of how, pulling out of the deal would impact that if United States reapplies economic sanctions. What can President Trump do, and now, his team, to work through that?
Right now, I think the first goal should be to limit the amount of money that the Iranians can make off the international oil markets by removing them from the SWIFT computer clearance system and make the currency, which is called the rial, more and more unusable. There was a time when I got the Menendez-Kirk sanctions through the Senate, and we tanked the value of the Iranian currency. I joked with Bob Menendez that the Iranians were so out of money they had to skip a payment or two to Hezbollah.
Right, which I'm sure that these terror groups didn't like very much. Right, and you just reminded us how Bob Menendez, a Democrat, was one of the few who didn't support President Obama and the Iran deal. Chuck Schumer had reservations. Some other Democrats did as well.
Right.
What do you make of John Kerry's tweets? He's been responding to Benjamin Netanyahu's assertions that the deal, that Iran has been continuing to proliferate nuclear weapons. Yesterday, he tweeted, John Kerry, every detail PM Netanyahu presented yesterday was every reason the world came together to apply years of sanctions and negotiate the Iran nuclear agreement, because the threat was real and had to be stopped. It's working! ! That's why Israeli security experts are speaking out.
Right.
What do you make of that?
Tell you, one time in a private briefing, Wendy Sherman and Kerry were briefing a number of senators, and she piped up, and the subject of North Korea came up, and she said, "I fixed that problem in the Clinton administration." And I turned to Kerry and I said, "You really got to rebalance that woman's meds," because it was clear that the North Koreans were on their way, and we estimate they could have access to several nuclear weapons after the. I will tell you, there was a time when Wendy arranged for $300 million in taxpayer money to go to an organization called the Korean Energy Development Organization, and I asked Kerry, where did that $300 million go? And he looked at me. I said, well, you were chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee at the time. The $300 million was spent. I asked about the people who were in charge of this situation, like Charles Cartman. And where did all this money go? And he said, don't know. It was too long ago.
Right, and that's what's basically going to happen with that $150 billion on frozen sanctions and the additional billions in cash that we sent to them. They used it to advance their military and their own strategic interest. We know that they didn't do this to help their people. Their people are still suffering economically. The supreme leaders of Iran didn't use the money for cancer research by any means.
No. When you look at the cash payment, I think I worked it out to be around $220 per Iranian. So I asked my staff in the Senate to come up in person with a signed internet meme that said, since Obama sent $220 per Iranian to your country, did you see any of it? Just to underscore the point that the regime is completely corrupt.
Right, it just fell off the truck, and they used it to advance their nuclear weapons program. How does this play into Russia? Because we know Russia and Syria support Iran; those three support each other, and we know that So how do you think Russia is going to handle the fact if President Trump and his administration pull out of Iran? At the same time, the Trump administration is arming Ukrainian fighters to be able to defend themselves, so that's not going to make Russia happy. How do you think this is going to tilt the scales in a geopolitical sense?
I think, if the president follows his correct decision to arm the Ukrainians with weapons that actually handle the Russians, he develops enormous leverage over Putin. And the Russians are so big and so powerful, they're able to undercut a lot of U.S. diplomacy with Iran. And that is something we got to be mindful of.
Right, exactly. So with John Kerry, another tweet he has, there was no negotiation and all that changed with the JPOA, blow up the deal and you're back there tomorrow. Do you agree with that assessment? Right. I mean, aren't we there now? They're already funding terrorism, and they continue to advance their nuclear weapons program.
The problem with John Kerry that he has been wrong on every major foreign policy issue for the last 50 years. Only Joe Biden has a record as bad as Kerry on foreign policy.
Right, and I think many people agree with you. I mean, look at ISIS under his watch, totally raged, thousands and thousands of people killed and tortured. ISIS, developed a caliphate, and then look at the global refugee crisis under President Obama's administration, and then the genocide in Syria. I mean, I don't know what went right with their foreign policy, personally, right? And then, Russia annexed Crimea, invaded Ukraine. The world became an absolutely more dangerous place. What do you make of the fact that when the JPOA...
We've always that is a lesson of history that the greatest generation of Americans knows too well. Mm-hmm. That we saw under Chamberlain how appeasement never stops a war. It just ensures it. It is the fastest road to war that you can get when you're dealing with totalitarian regimes. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I mean, we know that Iran, it's the Islamic State. It's the world's greatest sponsor of terror. And I think that President Obama, naively thought that he could win them over by being nice, by handing them carrots, all this money, relieve sanctions, that somehow they would join the community of nations. He
fell into the appeasers trap of not only, enriching and strengthening an enemy of the United States, and making war between an ally of the United States like Israel and Iran much more likely. That's the kind of liberal trap that often happens to the appeasers.
Right, that if you
where they have no idea where they're going, and they're suddenly doing crazy things like sending plane loads of cash to enemies of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What do you make of Secretary of State Pompeo? Is he the right man for the job?
He is probably the most qualified man that has ever had the job since Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. To be first in his class at West Point, to be first at Harvard, and even in Cambridge there with you guys in the Boston area. That was really an intellectual achievement. Probably naturally one of the smartest guys that's ever stood for the job since Jefferson.
Right. I mean, he's got certainly has the experience and the background. We've had the pleasure of interviewing him here on our show, and a very smart individual, strong background, as you mentioned. Just to pivot real quickly to another key position that President Trump needs to nominate, and that is, he's already nominated her, needs to clear through the government, is Gina Haspel to run the CIA. Many people support her because they said she's been there 30 years. She's done a great job. Others have pushed back because she was there when some of the aggressive interrogation techniques were going on. But would you say that's her fault? If it's legal, then it's legal. She didn't do anything illegal if that's what the policy was at the time.
I would say that that she's the right person for the job because she's quite obviously very hard on the interrogation issue. Many liberals do not want her to move forward because they say that she was involved in some sort of torture or whatever. Mm-hmm. I would say that extracting the maximum amount of information from terrorists as fast as possible is necessary to protect the American people. And I think she's the right person for the job.
Right, and those techniques aren't even being used anymore. So it's a mute issue. It's in the rearview mirror. That was a long time ago, and things have changed. So thank you so much for joining us, Senator Kirk. Always a pleasure to have you on our show, and we'd love to welcome you back because this deal is developing. Especially now, May 12th is the deadline for President Trump to decide.
I hope that John Bolton and the president does the right thing and cancels this agreement.
Absolutely, and just a parting question. So has Benjamin Netanyahu proven to be right? Because remember when he made that historic address before Congress warning how disastrous?
He did. I was there. I remember to release that much data on the Iranian nuclear program. We have seen for a long time evidence that the Iranians were out there trying to procure nuclear materials to accelerate their nuclear program. I will tell you that there is a long-term glimmer of hope here, that if the United States, which is the preeminent 21st century economy, up against the Iran, which is the preeminent attempt at bringing back the 7th and 8th centuries, which is incompatible with high-tech weaponry, that things are looking good for the United States, that we can beat these guys eventually.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll have you back on real soon. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We were just speaking with former Illinois Senator Mark Kirk, who sits on a nonpartisan organization, nonprofit, United Against a Nuclear Iran. It's